every day. Season 2 is here now. Moiraine fights a fate without the power. Land gets hurt, Varen and Thomas save the day. Hey, hey. Nope, no Draghkars today. Oh, were you crying that we didn't get to see the Draghkar scene? Can I help you get past that? In today's video, we finally reached the end of Season 2, Episode 1 and examine the scene of Moiraine fleeing alone to encounter some fades in the dark. So much action and all the nuance and foreshadowing behind it, I can't wait to unpack it with you. I'm Koala Sedai and I'm just loving breaking down Season 2 of the Wheel of Time scene by scene and sharing it with you. The scene we're examining today are the final scenes of the episode and they all flow together, so I'm going to take it from when Moiraine begins saddling Aldib to the very end. Moiraine hopes that her stone throwing has put Lan off enough that she'll get a good head start. Since he told her to get her own dinner, well, she's possibly hoping that she won't even be missed until morning. At dinner, it's obvious no one else expects to see her that night. She has misjudged, however, how deeply Lan is concerned for her and is not going to run away no matter how many stones she throws at him. In the books, Rand does most of the stone throwing and running away, so it's really interesting to see Moiraine exposed this way. I know the situation and scenes between Moiraine and Lan have been embraced happily by, well, not everyone. I like them because as the books progressed, I felt many of the Aes Sedai began to just feel like inept characters. And I'm enjoying a feeling of greater depth and nuance into behind making bad decisions that we're getting to see in the show. Now, don't underestimate what has happened to Moiraine, especially because she believes that she's been stilled. And this means that while she keeps trying to touch the source, she believes that stilling cannot ever be reversed. So, to me, her grief is really well portrayed. When you suffer a huge loss, it doesn't matter that you know the fact of the loss, because that's what you know in your head. But you still find yourself looking for something that will prove that it's all just a big mistake. Moiraine has been shaken to her core to realise that Lanfear is indeed loose, and only she knows that Rand is alive. She can't even tell anyone the double desperation of Lanfear without betraying that fact. We're seeing a theme in this season surrounding stronger together, through so many characters trying to go it alone. So I'm enjoying that this time it isn't just those stupid kids that get this wrong. So, alone, Moiraine rides out at night even though she knows that there were fades following Baldomen. Did she think she would draw them away? Or did she think he had drawn them away? Well, either way, she's wrong. I'm sure we all know that this scene gives us something that reflects and flips a scene from the books. I always found the Draghkar fascinating and was disappointed that Robert Jordan didn't take them further in the books. If he had, there may well have been a justification for spending the enormous amount of money that it would have taken to portray them well in the show. But since he didn't, I think investing more in the Madral actually makes sense. We already know that they're badass, but they were leading Trollocs in Season 1. So now, to see them drawing swords and shadow shifting, well, we get some great insight into their nature, their threat, And all of this is done visually. It also foreshadows for us how important it's going to be for someone like Rand to be able to protect himself when we see what those fades are capable of doing in such a silent way compared to the attack on Winternight. That was huge, that was loud, that was big armies, that was, messy. All of a sudden, we just have this really silent in the shadows, and there's some fades. At this point, I want to just go and have a look at a chapter in the book that all the scenes Moiraine has had so far in this episode, and many of the scenes she has during this season, are directly tied to. I bet you know which one it is. It's The Great Hunt, Chapter 22. In this chapter, as it opens, Moiraine and Lan are at Tiffon's Well, staying with Vandene and Adelaus. Vandene's water is JM. The chapter opens with Moiraine speaking to Lan, and her opening words are, "Nothing is happening as I expect." I love that because honestly, isn't that exactly how season 2 opens, with Moiraine finding that nothing is happening the way she expected? I love the opening description of the library room at Vandene and Adelaus's home that we get in the book. So I'm just going to read it for you and just reflect on that compared to the room that we've seen Moiraine in during this episode. The long polished table before her was littered with books and papers, scrolls, manuscripts, many of them dusty from long storage and tattered with age, some only fragments. The room seemed almost made of books and manuscripts, filling shelves except where there were doors or windows or the fireplace. The chairs were high-backed and well padded, but half of them and most of the small tables held books, and some had books and scrolls tucked under them. Only the clutter in front of Moiraine was hers, though. In the next section of the book, Moiraine talks to Lan about when they first met. Now I'm going to hold that conversation over till we get to the scene where Adelaus asks them about this. However, what I will say about it is that they have a conversation that's not exactly rainbows and unicorns, with Moiraine deliberately making stinging comments at him. Again, I'll leave the next part of the conversation until we get to the respective scene in the show. It's really interesting how much this chapter is used throughout more than one episode. During this conversation, however, I want to note that Lan shows open anger at her words. In fact, the first time Moiraine has ever seen him do this. Now, we certainly see Lan showing anger, albeit in a way more controlled than I would in the show. We know clearly in the books that Moiraine is very aware of the relationship and feelings that Lan's developing for Nynaeve. Show Moiraine is just as aware. This is not what's going on here, but it is all a part of the many layers of what is going on for Moiraine. In fact, in the books, Moiraine wonders if Lan will come to her and ask to be released from the bond. She also wonders how she will respond if that day comes. I love the reflections and flipping of all of this. The next event in this chapter is that we see Moiraine have a conversation with Vandene about the information she's been seeking. Again, I'll come back to this when we get to a further scene in another episode, but I'm just loving that doing a reread of this chapter now to create this breakdown that I'm doing, I'm just seeing how much this chapter saturates many of the events for Moiraine in season 2. In the show, while we get a conversation with Moiraine and Verin, who is in Vandene's place, later on it does partly hark back to this conversation, but it's not a complete connection. In the show, instead of asking all of those different questions of Vandene/Varen, Moiraine has had a string of visitors, eyes and ears, bringing her pieces of information. Of course, she has also been studying like she was in the books at Vandene's place. In the book version, Vandene mentions something that Moiraine can't quite put her finger on as soon as the conversation finishes. It leaves her with a distracting itch at the back of her mind, and this is partly why she isn't aware of the Draghkar until the last moment. There's lots of speculations on that passage because the book is deliberately obscure. Let me just read that little quote to you, in fact. After the white-haired Aes Sedai left, Moiraine gathered her cloak and, muttering to herself, went into the garden. There was something in what Vandene had said that tugged at her mind, but she could not remember what it was. An answer? Or a hint to an answer for a question she had not asked, but she could not bring the question to mind either. The garden was small like the house, but neat even in the moonlight, aided by the yellow glow from the cottage windows, with sandy walks between careful beds of flowers. She settled her cloak loosely on her shoulders against the soft coolness of the night. What was the answer, and what was the question? Personally, I think that in the book, this question and answer is talking about making the connection between what has troubled Moiraine so much about the depth of the perversion she found in Padan Fain. I believe it was this passage. Shadow Logoth, Vandene snorted. In brief, the city was destroyed by its own hate. Every living thing except Mordeth, the counsellor who began it all, using the tactics of the Dark Friends against the Dark Friends, and he now lies trapped there, waiting for a soul to steal. I'm sure that that's what's niggling at the back of Moiraine's brain, because she was so stunned by the depth of how perverted Padan Fain was back in Chapter 7. Now, we're not sure that we're going to see the same level of insanity in Fain in the show. He's certainly on a different path so far, but whether that will twist and turn towards book Fain is one of the fun things being left to us to waffo. We do know he was able to turn his head and look about at the Dark Friends social when no one else could. We also know he was able to nail a Madral to a door, so watch and find out, and wait for more of my breakdowns as I work through his Season 2 arc, because who knows what will come to me as I do that. In the book, the last question Moiraine has for Vandene is about Lanfear, and she is so hesitant to ask it because it says that she lets the name slip between her lips as if it were escaping. Lanfear. The reply Vandene gives is, "For once," the other woman sighed, "I know not a whit more than I did as a novice. The Daughter of the Night remains as much a mystery as if she truly had cloaked herself in darkness." She paused, peering into her cup, and when she looked up, her eyes were sharp on Moiraine's face. Lanfear was linked to the dragon, to lose Theron Telamon. Moiraine, do you have some clue as to where the dragon will be reborn? Or was reborn? Has he come already? If I did, Moiraine replied levelly, would I be here, instead of in the White Tower? The Amelin knows as much as I, that I swear. Have you received a summons from her? Just examine the beauty of that Aes Sedai answer Moiraine gives. Okay, so firstly, it's not a lie for her to say, if I did, would I be here instead of in the White Tower? Because she wasn't saying, no, I didn't. She was asking a question back, twisting instead of an answer to give an Aes Sedai type question. And then she does give a truthful answer. I know as much as the Amelin seat. It's just hilarious. But the information that we actually get in the book from Van Dien is very similar to what we hear Moiraine tell Rand. Oh, hang on, that's in a later episode. So I'll come back around to this when we get there. I do like that the last piece of information Moiraine learns in the book before the Draghkar attack is about land fear. The same goes for the show before the Fade attack. The first big difference is that in the book, Moiraine was not leaving alone on horseback and was certainly not, running to leave land behind. She was simply alone in the garden. However, I'll just read that passage again out of the book. Sand crunched behind her and she turned, thinking it was Lan. A shadow loomed dimly only a few paces from her, a shadow that appeared to be a too-tall man wrapped in his cloak. But the face caught the moon, gaunt-cheeked, pale, with black eyes too big above a puckered red-lipped mouth. The cloak opened, unfolding into great wings like a bat's. Knowing it was too late, she opened herself to Saidar, but the Draghkar began to croon and its soft hum filled her, fragmenting her will. Saidar slipped away. She felt only a vague sadness as she stepped towards the creature. The deep crooning that drew her closer suppressed feeling. White hands, like a man's hands, but tipped with claws, reached for her, and lips the colour of blood curved in a travesty of a smile, bearing sharp teeth, but dimly, so dimly she knew it would not bite or tear. Fear, the Draghkar's kiss. Once those lips touched her, she would be as good as dead, to be drained of soul, then of life. Whoever found her, even if they came as the Draghkar let her fall, would find a corpse without a mark, and cold as if dead 2 days. And if they came before she was dead, what they found would be worse, and not really her at all any longer. The croon pulled her within reach of those pale hands, and the Draghkar's head bent slowly toward her. She felt only the smallest surprise when a sword blade flashed over her shoulder to pierce the Draghkar's breast, and a little more when a second sword crossed her other shoulder to strike beside the first. Now, honestly, how much would it have cost to recreate a scene and a shadowspawn like that without it looking dumb and with us comprehending all of the deep nuance of how its song was crooning to her and pulling her in and what was going to happen as her soul was sucked out of her and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it really just too complex to be able to simply show. So in the book, just one Draghkar and 2 warders working together. In the show, 4 Myrddraal, 2 warders and an Aes Sedai. But what we got from this scene in the show is that we now appreciate just how deadly Fades are on their own, how fast they can move like a viper. Now, we did see that in season 1 with Tom, but, there was Tom. He was a gleeman. Now we're seeing it with Moiraine, who we saw throw an entire inn at an army of Trollocs. We can see what excellent sword skills they have because we see them fighting not only Lan but also Tomas, and we can see how they move, shape-shifting from shadow to shadow. We could do all of this without the complexity of trying to show that Dracula-like creature. And it's a far better payoff because our viewers already knew that the Fades are to be feared, but now they've become even more terrifying. Another complexity in the book is that the Draghkar had been warded, which is why none of them had sensed it approaching. At first it had appeared that Moiraine was simply distracted, and we find out that Lan was also distracted. However, the explanation of being warded made so much sense in the book and was such a big drop about the existence of the Black Archer, but it just would not have worked in this episode because we just didn't have time to let it really all come out properly if we had tried to reproduce what happened in the book. Whereas the revelation of the existence of the Black Archer worked so well coming from Varen, and we'll get there when we get there, but it was extra delicious being done the way they did it in the show. Now, this scene is fast, action-packed, and it makes complete sense to viewers without any book knowledge because it builds on what we'd already previously learned. The entire scene takes less than 5 minutes from Moiraine saddling Aldib to the end. It involves a total of 9 words being spoken over nearly 5 minutes. So this is an exceptional example of show, not tell. All right, so then what did they show us? Moiraine has decided to ditch Lan since throwing rocks didn't get him to run away, and head to Cairhien on her own to assist Rand with the new knowledge that Lanfear is walking the world again. She encounters a Fade, and we see that even without the one power, she is cunning, and had there only been one, she may well have just been fine and gotten through to complete her mission. However, she is not fine, and so we learn that as well as leading armies of Trollocs, Fades can travel together to carry out assignments without Trollocs being with them at all. This means they can carry out secret, quiet assignments. We did learn that again in a small way in Season 1, but do you know what? Most new viewers have probably forgotten, and this has now compounded and really put that knowledge into us in a way we're not going to forget again. So Moiraine is injured when Lan appears, but not because he sensed the shadowspawn. He appeared because he found she had left on her own and had followed her. In the books with the Draghkar incident, he is furious that he didn't sense the Draghkar, because a warder is supposed to be able to sense the shadowspawn, and he blames Moiraine for it. He says, "If you had not made me so angry I had to go work forms with JM, and so angry that I gave it up to come back to the house." So no matter what people say about Lan in the show showing so much more emotion, no way. Lan is being completely on form in the show. So what we saw in the show early in this attitude was Lan struggling with many emotions, and he was out there trying to work the sword forms alone. A nice little callback. Fortunately, in the show, he was angry enough to tell her to make her own dinner, and then so angry that he took the meal to her anyway, and that's how he found that she'd gone. I have heard some people were disappointed that Lan didn't manage to kill the 3 Madral on his own. Well, I believe that we were clearly seeing the difference between a great swordsman compared to a bonded warder who's a great swordsman. You can see the difference in episode 8 when Lan is bonded again and using his sword. And, he doesn't do too shabbily here either, remember? Lan quickly kills one Fade, but he is then attacked by two at once. He's injured, and not just once, but several times, and continues to fight until he can't rise. Just as it seems that all is lost, there are some weaves that almost seem to be coming from Moiraine as she's trying desperately to channel. And then a voice yells, "Cover your ears!" Tomas leaps in with a flaming sword that has obviously been set afire by the weaves. He's able to kill the two Murdral, and we end that scene with Lan looking directly at Moiraine and asking, "What aren't you telling me?" Moiraine doesn't answer, of course, and we simply fade out on her face. I love that we know what she isn't telling him, and yet, for the first time viewers, they don't actually really know what it is that they know. In the same way, book readers really didn't know what most of the content of chapter 22 was all about until things either clicked later on in books or, more probably, on a reread. The concluding scene of this episode brought us to a similar point so far as Moiraine's plot as what we reached with the end of chapter 22 in The Great Hunt. In the book, Moiraine is hiding out at Tiffin's Well with a vast library of historical documents and books to study. She is researching a range of topics and not really making sense of them all. Her last piece of information is about Lanfear. She already knew or suspected Lanfear was free because of the blood calls blood in chapter 7. She is alone and is attacked by shadowspawn, and both Lan and JM are only just able to save her in time. In the show, Moiraine is hiding out at Tiffin's Well with a vast library of historical documents and books to study. She is researching a range of topics and not really making sense of them all. Her last piece of information is about Lanfear, which is brought to her by Bail Doman, who is one of her eyes and ears. She rides away alone and is attacked by shadowspawn, and both Lan and Tomas are only just able to save her in time. Well, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this breakdown. And finally, we've made it to the end of episode 1. I can't wait to begin on episode 2. But did I miss anything? Is there anything you notice going on here that harps back to, reflects, or is a flip on something that happened in the books? I'd love to know anything else that you can see in this. And there have been some fantastic conversations in the comments below, in YouTube in particular. I'm loving it. Please do also take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and I love hearing your thoughts. I'll be back with more as soon as I can. It's taking me longer than I had hoped. Life keeps getting in the way. But I'm Koala Sedai. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and responding.